right, here we go. So we're going to kick off the conference panel portion of the evening. And I want to just quickly introduce the panelists. You can read about them on our Facebook page, Café de la Culture, Salon Philosophique, and our website, which is global.thealchemyofimperfection.com. So, in order of appearance to my left, your right, we have Carre Otis, we have Laurel Mulholland, Ellen Burke, and Nora Ahmed-Kamal. Is that right?
No, Ahmed-Kamal.
Okay. And Sarah Rimmel, and Michaele Ferguson, and Camilo Casas. So each panelist is going to give a 5-minute intro to the topic. Tonight's topic is, why is now the time to bring women to the forefront of, am I talking way too loud for this microphone? No. Okay. This is feeding into the live stream, but not into the room. So the topic tonight is, why is now the time to bring women to the forefront of politics and social issues? And how does the paradigm of perfection immobilize women? So we'll start with Carre.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. I'm super honored to be here and to be part of this really, really important dialogue and discussion at this time. I wrote some stuff, which I feel like before we go to Q&A is probably the best way for me to introduce myself. So my incarnation as a female in this lifetime has embodied archetypes across the spectrum. I've lived in the body of the objectified feminine, the silenced feminine, the rebel feminine, and the empowered feminine, which happily I'm here right now at this moment. I'm sure it'll switch. I have endured firsthand the societal expectations placed upon me due not only to my assigned gender, but to go even further due to the way that I look. That positioning and my silence enabled an entire industry to take advantage of me. Until I really discovered ways to turn the tables and take full advantage of it myself. The paradigm of perfection captures and enslaves men and women and is pushed upon us really from every angle. The entertainment and modeling industry are the obvious culprits that produce an endless stream of subversive media messaging, pushing premature sexualization of our youth, as well as promoting severe boundary violation in mainstream advertisement and media in general. We really need not look far to find exploitative images that we all are exposed to constantly. Ones that often dictate society's behaviors and norms. Our obsession with perfection has led to a disconnect from our true nature. An entire industry, which is really a thriving industry, has been built on our desire to attain the impossible. And it has us running and reeling to get somewhere other than right where we are in our essential true nature. So my personal interest in work lies in transcending these messages and these constructs. I find that by naming and not normalizing what I see around me, I'm freeing myself and others from the traps that seem to have many individuals immobilized and even hypnotized at this point. We have manifested and been held captive by a system based in fear, misogyny, xenophobia, and separation. Our children feel it. My daughters feel it. I feel it. It's a discussion in our households and a discussion in our schoolrooms. My kids are in Waldorf, so there's a lot of discussions going on. They're not exposed to it within the TV, but we have discussions about this. So it's time to rise above the rhetoric we hear coming from power base. By pointing towards the truth, we can awaken and even be set free. If we can factor in and consider that our views and our disconnect has brought us to this very place in history, I believe we can mobilize and recognize the options that we have. And we do have options. The fact of the matter is that women are born to morph. Women are born to create and to birth. We can attain the impossible. Those of us that have grown a life within us and have birthed that magnificence into this world readily know on a cellular level all of this potential. And those of us who've been maternal, whether by having biological children or not, know that we have an inherent ability to create life, to give space to life, literally to vitalize. We have a natural affinity to operate from the heart. Women. It's in our DNA. And it's time we direct this nurturing and loving energy inward, toward ourselves and towards one another. This ability to love combined with our inner strength makes us a force to be reckoned with. We are all recognizing the deep need we have at this moment to bring women to the forefront of political and social issues. Our ability to connect empathetically to a culture of care as opposed to a culture of fear is the way to move forward. And it's going to restore this connection to ourselves, amongst ourselves, as well as to nature and to this planet and to this earth. This care resonates and ignites a global web that supports the changes needed for our survival and for the generations to come. And I'm holding this place and holding this space because I have daughters. You have sons, you have daughters, granddaughters, and we give a shit. There you go.
Thank you so much. My goal was to have at least 2 men on the panel. And Camilo Casas is holding down the fort tonight. But I want to welcome in one more song from Bear and a word. As a stand-in panelist.
I'm honored and humbled and slightly in awe to be even a guest in such a wonderful panel. As I was listening earlier, I was thinking about what my great-great-grandfather taught me. He was Ute, Native American. He lived in the mountains above here, not too far. And I had, unfortunately, a very short time with him. But Grandpa said that there is one true medicine we have, and that is love. He also talked a lot about connectedness. And connectedness is not just you and me, and you and me, and you and him. Connectedness is to all things. It's to all of us. The Lakota have a saying, "Mitakoyayasan," and it literally translates, all are my relations. All of us two-leggeds are related. But we're also related to the four-leggeds, to the winged ones, to the water beings, to the stone people, and to the standing people, the trees and the grasses. We are all related. And each one of us is due respect and nurture and love.
My name's Laurel, and I just want to thank you, Cara, for this amazing, cozy, yummy, nourishing event. It's so
We
awesome.
went to Waldorf school together.
And we haven't connected for, I don't know,
Since then.
So you do the math.
It all comes full circle.
And if I have to get up and leave, I'm not being rude. I just have childcare issues, so no worries.
We have mothers on the panel.
So I never know how nervous I'm going to be. So I loved your get out of jail free card that imperfection is totally allowed. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a private practice, psychotherapy practice in Boulder. And I have a specialty working with couples where there's been infidelity and ongoing romantic indiscretion. So a huge part of my work with those couples is bringing them back from defended states of being that often got them to those situations in the first place via learning how to be vulnerable. So a defended state can look many different ways. It can look like anger, can look like rash decision making. It can look like impatience, irritability. It can look like infidelity, eating disorders, addiction to pornography, violence. It shows up in many ways. And on the flip of that, the counter to that, there's this thing called vulnerability. And vulnerability is defined as the state of being that allows for the possibility of being hurt physically or emotionally. So we run a pretty good race of trying to beat vulnerability with our defended selves. And what happens over time as we carry this scene out is what we're experiencing now. And maybe many of us have experienced in relationship. We build walls, we fight wars, but ultimately we experience isolation and vast divisiveness. Essentially what happens is we want nothing to do with that thing standing in front of us that makes us feel vulnerable. Usually it's because somewhere in the game we got hurt, abandoned, shunned, or shamed for it, and we said never again. I never want to feel that way again. Brené Brown, for those of you that don't know, she's a shame, resilience, vulnerability researcher. And she says that when we take the courageous step of stepping into vulnerability, we step into the birthplace of creativity, love, belonging, and joy. So I brought this question, and I often do, back to my couples, and I wanted to ask them, what is your most vulnerable thing hanging out inside that you want to say? And I'm just going to read a couple of quotes, and this is what they feel like vulnerability looks and sounds like. We stopped having sex because I didn't want him to see my jiggly tummy and my thighs after childbirth. I'm sorry it's been 5 years. The lights have to be dim because I don't want him to see me. I'm sorry I was punishing you for all these years, but I resent you that you didn't make more money. It sounds like this. The kids are wreaking havoc on my well-being. I need a break. And I'm not talking like a walk around the block kind of break. I need some time away. And it also sounds like this. My creative self got eaten by my suburban life, and I need to take it back. Vulnerability shows up when we admit our mistakes. It shows up when we're nervous doing a panel in a living room of someone you don't know. And you admit it. It's admitting that we hurt someone, that we're afraid. It's admitting we don't know how to do something. It's asking for help. Vulnerability requires a degree of tenderness for ourselves and for those around us. And you could even say that tenderness and patience are the fertile ground that vulnerability is birthed from. So, we are cruising politically and socially with an overprescribed dose of patriarchy and zero prescription for tender vulnerability. Our children feel it, our marriages are suffering, and our political system completely denies it. The world is hurting for lack of owning our imperfections, acknowledging our wounds, and admitting to our mistakes. Instead, we're bullying up, we're chesting up, we're armoring up, we're fighting, and we're terrorizing the ones that take a vulnerable stance. We don't need more of the same. I tell this to my couples every day, 5,000 times a day. The same generates more of the same. Doing it different by law of physics requires things go differently. In my work, doing it different starts really small, starts in the home, starts in the bedroom, starts with our children. We start by modeling, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Because when we do that, we give permission for those around us to do the same. So when we take this stance, and this becomes our gesture to the world, it doesn't matter if you're a woman in politics, and it doesn't matter if you're a woman in the home. We're doing it differently, and that is what creates a cultural shift.
If you're standing in the back and you're tired of standing, there's at least 5 chairs up here free, so feel free to come forward.
Hello, is this on? My name is Ellen Burns, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Thank you for coming this evening and for supporting Cara's very important and impactful work in elevating the conversation of, in my paraphrase, women, perfection, politics, and when will we be enough? I'm offering 2 perspectives this evening, one on the state of young women in finance, and the other of generational perspectives on rape, and these are related. I have been in the CSU College of Business, Department of Finance for the past 2 years after extensive work in the private sector and other academic appointments. When I entered the University of Texas in Austin MBA program in 1993 as one of 30% of the women who were enrolled, I believed that I would not only be meeting my personal goals, but that I would also be creating progress toward a stronger platform for the next generation of women. Once I began my Ph.D. program in resource economics, I had no reason to doubt my path to success. I was smart, motivated, and disciplined. A little on my finance students. Today, at least half of the business majors at CSU are women. Maybe we have made progress. This semester, I am enjoying 156 students in 2 of our more technical courses, one for juniors and the other for seniors. Within the 25% of finance majors who are women, the topic of perfectionism versus drive versus self-doubt is ever so relevant. Some highlights. When I asked my students why they chose finance and what they wanted to achieve, the men, it turned out, were likely to answer for stability and to support a family. Not a single woman answered that she has chosen finance to support a family. One student has shared that due to her boyfriend kidnapping and raping her, she often becomes irrationally scared, and she still wishes to complete her finance degree with our most technical concentration in 4 years. Another woman, double majoring in finance and marketing, though having scored 13 points over the class average on the first quiz, believes she is not good at finance and will pursue a marketing job in advertising. And yet another, and these are all within a week, recently earned a 100% on a difficult exam. Her exam was stunning, organized, neat, well-written, and technically proficient. When I returned her exam, she was so relieved. She had struggled with it and had been afraid she might have failed. So the call to you. We have plenty of work to do now. We need to protect our health and reproductive rights. We need to nurture and protect our sexual and gender identities. We need to continue to create opportunity for women in math and science. We need to strengthen women's rights to safety and the obligation of men to ensure that they do not sexually and or physically assault women. So on me, I am a first-generation Title IX woman who has had consistent access to athletics. I am the child of 2 parents with bachelor's degrees. My mother was exclusively a full-time mother until I was in 9th grade. My parents were married and we attended church every Sunday, and we ate dinner at 6 p.m. every night. I was an honor student. You know where this is going. I was an honor student, a top piano student, sought-after babysitter, school choir, school plays, and that story of perfection was never going to cut it. It wasn't going to be enough for my mother, the daughter of a violent alcoholic father, the survivor of college rape, and the anguish and shame of giving up a child for adoption in her early 20s. And when her husband, my father, raped and molested me, she would conveniently ignore it, blaming bad behavior on the devil in me. This year, I am celebrating 25 years of having confronted him and authentically creating myself. And accepting that the educational, athletic, musical, political, and social recognition are just stuff, and that my humanity, my shortcomings, are the me of greatest beauty and achievement. We need to access education, healthcare, safety, and we need to be able to say, I am the best version of me. I know that I am a survivor because I have confronted the ugly and live in the glorious mess of who I am. And I got here through the fearless pursuit of my truth, the discipline to be educated, and the drive to have my place at tables of influence that I choose. I want everyone to be able to say that I am the best version of me, because that is real progress.
Okay. Yeah. So just looking around, I see a lot of papers, and I have no paper in front of me. And I do have a phone where there are like notes inside, which I'm telling myself I'm not going to look at. I might change my mind in a minute. But that's just me trying to be in how I'm feeling, because I wrote this yesterday and this morning and half an hour before I came, and changing my mind. And it is like, yeah, it takes a lot to just, there's this sense of like, my mind was like, Nora, so that's my name, Nora, you need to do this, and you should write it in this way, and you have to present it in that way, and be sure that it's going to be eloquent, and it's going to be brilliant, and not to be too nervous, and people don't notice that you're sweating. And it's like all these fucking shoulds, which are just killing me. Like, they're just killing me. And it's like, that's what perfectionism, so English is like my third language, United States of America, which usually have one or two. So there will be words that will be difficult as the main word of today. But yeah, perfectionism feels like it's so oppressive. It's so oppressive. And perfectionism looks in a certain way. Perfectionism, I've been taught, is to be, first of all, heterosexual. And that feels like a word that's hard to say in this room, because I felt it. I felt that a lot of what has been said have been heteronormative. which is hard. I'm here with my spouse, who is trans, and we've not talked about that. We've only been speaking in binary terms. We have people here who are supporting Sarah and I, who are not identifying in the binary, so it's so fucking wonderful to see she, her, hers on your sheet. She, her, hers, here, over here. And yeah, so there is all this about being able-bodied, about being beautiful, which is what I'm benefiting from. I'm gonna say it. Thin privilege, being white. There's certain ways that also what we're talking about that also feels to me really related to white feminism, and that doesn't fit me as a multicultural individual. And it's very painful. It's so painful, and it does not give space for other experiences. Yeah, it's good. Heart racing, still sweating.
Welcome.
Yeah, I know. What else? Did I want to say something else? I feel like now my green phone. I do think I wanted to say something else. Let me just think. Ray, did I want to say something else? Spouse knows. I think maybe I'll just give it to you for now. Yeah? Yeah, maybe. See, we don't need to follow a certain format.
Yeah, I like that. In general, I like the play, the not having a specific format that we're doing. Because that is also perfectionism, and that is so difficult. My name's Sarah. I use she, her, her pronouns. It's my gender pronouns, and I identify as a cisgender woman, which means, if folks don't know what that means, really quickly, my assigned sex at birth is the same as how I identify my gender. So people have lots of different ways that they identify their gender, not necessarily how we look. So, yeah, what do I want to say? I wrote some stuff, and there's like a million things that I would want to say on a panel, and I also was like, 5 minutes, that's a long time. So, and I also was like thinking like all of these different ways I could start an introduction, because yesterday I got my hair cut, wanted to have a new haircut for this, and the first thing that the person said was, "Are you a bit of a perfectionist?" Which was lovely that she said that, because I was like, this is great. This is what I'm talking about tomorrow. And yesterday. And I didn't have like any hints of anything before that, which maybe I did, but I don't know. And then we talked about perfectionism for her and for me, and knowing that that's so different for every single person. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of what I want to share. And what I want to share is coming from me. It's not, I think that that's important, like where I work somewhere I work, but I'm also just speaking from me. I work with college students, so we talk a lot about sexism, we talk a lot about gender, we talk a lot about racism, we talk a lot about oppression, and there's a lot of microaggressions. I don't know if folks know the microaggressions. That term is a term where people experience things when they're not like the norm. Like if we're looking at the norm in U.S., North America, or United States of America in this particular context, and it's different in every context, but there's microaggressions based on what those norm ideas are about who's right, who's not right. And those are things we're taught. We're taught all of these things. We're taught these things that we then are taught that we have to fit these things. And I think that we learn, a lot of times we learn these things we learn them when we're babies. We learn them before we're born. People say blue and pink, and what are you gonna decorate your room? And we learn these things. And then we're taught that we have to fit those things. And even as much as I've been learning how to be aware of those all of the things we've been taught and all of the ways that I'm like, oh, is that true for me? Is that not true for me? I still fall into those traps of struggle with that. And yeah, and back to microaggression. So the way that we're taught that some people are right and some people are not right, and they're not fitting into these spaces. And using gender pronouns is a way to like do a microaffirmation. It's like, hey, there are people who don't fit in these norms. I was in a workshop recently, and somebody did their introductions, and they said, I identify as white. And I was like, wow, that's a really amazing microaffirmation for somebody to name that. Because I think that if we are really gonna do work that is really helpful in big ways, which I think we can do, we need to start, more of us, talking about what are our identities, what is our race, saying those things. Because I think a lot of times people from marginalized identities, sometimes it's already shown. You can already see that I'm a person of color. But so there are ways that people already have to, like, if they want to be part of spaces, they have to name their identities. And that's really difficult. So I think it's helpful when other folks in more different positions can also name their positions. Because we all have mixes of identities, places, and that's the term intersectionality. It's the idea that we all have, not all, I mean, people have different spaces, but probably like at least one privileged identity, maybe at least a privileged identity, maybe there's spaces that we have marginalized identities as well. So we all have these different combinations. And I think when we start talking about it, start talking to our families about it, start talking about these difficult things, knowing it's going to be difficult, then we can be doing, work that is actually acknowledging these different places that we live. Otherwise, it's like we're talking, and some people can't actually be there. Their voices are not actually able to be there. Well, I'm probably close to my time, which is cool. I think that on my bio, I put that I put on there that I was a woman of color, biracial, and I thought about adding on. I thought about naming all, other identities and other locations I have, and then I was like, I wanted to put that. I identify as a queer person, and I didn't put that on there because to put that on there, there's a lot of load around that. There's a lot of discrimination around that. I was like, I don't know that I'm actually ready to put that in writing in this way. I also wanted to, there's other identities I have. I'm able-bodied, middle class, college educated. I could go on, and I think it's interesting that it's so difficult to name those different things in spaces because it's like we don't have time. In the larger context, for me to take up space talking about all of the different ways I identify, I feel like there's sometimes that's not super welcome, which is okay. We can't always go, there are different things that we focus on, but I think it's important to start practicing that. And I guess in conclusion, I think that I also wrote some different things that I wanted to share. There's a difference between equity and equality. So we are not all coming from the same places, so we don't all need the same things. I think a lot of times we still want to act like colorblind and like everybody needs the same thing, but we don't. People don't. People have different resources, different experiences. They don't need the same thing. I think that there's a lot of potential for us to keep learning and to keep unlearning things that are not maybe so helpful. I didn't come out as queer until a few years ago because I had learned so much about what it means to be a woman who is attracted to men, and it took me a long time to unpack that. So it wasn't until I was working with a bunch of college students where they're like, really, there's all these different people who identify in all these different ways, and I'm like, oh, I can like breathe, and like maybe there's something here. So I think my point is that it takes work, and I will always be on this journey. And I invite other people, if you're not on that journey, to start getting on that journey more. I think people are here, you're on that journey to some degree. So have those really uncomfortable conversations. Go to it. There's so many workshops in this community around understanding race and gender identity and oppression and these systems we're in. So
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're stuck. There we are.
Teamwork.
Okay. I think a lot about politics, democracy, and feminism, and so those are the themes that I'm going to talk about. So thinking about the relationship between politics and perfectionism. We've just seen in some ways a real revitalization of women in political activism in the last month. With the Women's March on Washington and the sister marches in the United States and around the globe. And so to some extent, I think the question of what should women be doing now, or why should women be leaders, is kind of a moot point. There are women who are taking on leadership roles. And when I use the word women, I'm also referring to trans women as well as cisgendered women. And of course, the Women's March on Washington is named really problematically because there were men there were trans people there. We can go on, and I'll get to that. But what I'm seeing is that even though we've got this revitalization, I think that feminists, for the most part, who have not been activists for the long term, are really rusty when it comes to politics. And this is where perfectionism becomes a real problem, because you can't be a perfectionist and be engaged in politics. First of all, in a democracy, you're going to lose a lot. And in this democracy right now, you're going to lose a lot more than usual. If we expect that we've got to win if we enter politics, then we're going to be turned off from it. This is what feminists did after Roe v. Wade. They thought they were done. They packed up. They went home. And it turns out that they were wrong, that people who wanted to delegalize, criminalize abortion were organized and ready for the long-term battle, and feminists weren't, and they were caught off guard. And this is also what I think many people may risk doing with Trump. That is, people who are fighting Trump are going to lose on most things for now, because right now we have single-party rule, right? We've lost on most of the nominees that he's put forward for his cabinet, and that can be discouraging. And if you think I need to win in order to keep going, then people are just going to be turned off. Second, another reason why perfectionism is going to be a problem for anyone who wants to get into politics is that in politics you have to take a stand. Perfectionism, on the other hand, can paralyze you and keep you from taking a stand, especially today. What do I take a stand on? There's so much that's going on. All right, the last four weeks, one of the comics last night was saying, felt like 4 years. Right? 4 more weeks, right? That's not my line, that was his, right? So what do you take a stand on when there's so much stuff that seems really crucial, really important? There's so much to be due. What to be done? What if I pick the wrong issue? What if I don't know enough about the issue I think I should do something about? I don't want to say something stupid. I don't want to do the wrong things. I don't want to take the wrong kinds of actions. The reality here is that politics is like anything else that you might want to do. You're not going to figure out how to do it well until you've been doing it for a while. So you have to actually get your hands dirty, get messy, and make mistakes in order to learn how to do it. And you have to be able to overcome that perfectionism of needing to know exactly what to do before you do it. But I worry that especially our culture's focus on self-help undermines our ability to let go of this perfectionism when it comes to politics. We often say, I have to fix myself before I can fix the world. Or, and this comes back to some of the comments Nora was making, I think that sometimes we expect to be affirmed because we live in a culture that prizes affirmation and self-worth. The Women's Marches originally aimed to be, the Women's March on Washington, I should say, originally aimed to be affirming. That's what the organizers were going for. They accepted anybody who wanted to be a co-sponsor of the march. Then the organizers realized that they had a problem on their hands because they had some co-sponsors who didn't want to co-sponsor with other co-sponsors, and they realized they had to take a stand on certain issues that they thought were really important and especially crucial to dispelling the perception among many women of color that the march was really a white woman's march. And so they did a couple of things. They removed pro-life groups from the list of co-sponsors and said this is going to be a pro-choice march. And they took a strong stand in favor of Black Lives Matter and in favor of diversity in general. Now, many white women complained about this taking the stance taking on Black Lives Matter and felt like they were being excluded or shamed for being white. There were pro-life women who felt like they were being excluded from the march because the march was telling them that it was a pro-choice rally. But that's politics. You have to pick your battles, and you have to let go of the need to make everybody feel included or affirmed along the way. It doesn't mean that being inclusive is unimportant, but if you make that the goal or something that the precondition, I guess I should say, the precondition for politics, then you're never going to get off the ground because there is no political agenda that's going to make everybody feel absolutely included, and there is no political agenda that everybody's going to be able to get on board with. You're going to offend somebody. One feminist said, if you're going to get involved in politics, you're going to piss people off. So if women are going to sustain the level of political engagement that we've seen in the last month, we need to let go of our perfectionism. And this is a message not just for women, but for anyone who wants to be involved in politics. We need to get used to losing. We need to get used to excluding people because we dared to take a stand. And we need to get used to making mistakes, screwing up, offending people we didn't want to offend, excluding people we didn't want to exclude, and learning how to do politics better. And the only way to do that is to not sit around and wait for the perfect moment, but to pick a battle, any battle, and go get your hands dirty.
Amen. Yes. Hi, my name is Camilo. I use he, him, his, and I'm a cisgendered man. And I work for Moving to End Sexual Assault, which is a wonderful organization. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's our local rape crisis center. But our name is Moving to End Sexual Assault, not moving to cope with it. So we take very seriously this immense challenge of like what it means to address sexual violence and to get to the roots of it. And to that end, what I do for them is I work on our prevention education programming. And fundamentally, what that means, so here's a number to throw out. So 95%. 95% of sexual violence, shocker, is committed by men. Sexual violence, insofar as it's an issue that insofar as you're going to gender it as an issue, it's a men's issue. Fundamentally, violence is a men's issue. Over 90% of all violent crimes are committed by men. And the topic at hand, this kind of this notion of perfection, it's interesting because in a lot of what my work with boys, with young men, with men in our community, the rape culture that we are trying to address is in many ways actually situated in notions of perfecting masculinity. And I'm very cognizant that today is looking at the feminine, and I want to honor that and respect that. But I think it's important to universalize the deficiencies in the search of perfection, in recognizing that a good deal of the violence that occurs in our community is predicated upon manifesting, performing, identifying with conceptions of what it is to be a man that are fundamentally toxic, basically, to our collective existence. And I really look forward to our conversation here, but I always, one of the things that I coach kind of the boys and the young men and the men that I work with is whenever they are given the privilege and honor to go into a space where they can be an ally and work with fellows who are in the gender justice movement, that the thing I try to tell them to keep front and center in their minds is their male privilege, the fact that their voices will be listened to more than others, and to speak less and listen more.
That's great.
So thank you everyone on the panel for your intro. Now we're going to open up the dialogue with questions from you, the audience. And before we do that, I just want to give an acknowledgement to the men in the room tonight who are sharing this evening with us to celebrate women stepping forward. Thank you so much. So, yeah, we see you. So raise your hand if you have a question and then come up and speak it into the mic. You can face the panel and you can either address your question to a specific panelist or you can address your question to the whole panel and we can organically volunteer to answer the question. So who has a question for the panel? Don't be shy.
Don't make us have to call.
Really? Nobody? Yeah.
All the way in the back, Nikki? Yeah, shout it out and I'll repeat it into the mic.
Okay, this is a question for everyone, and it's a really massive question. That's the sort of questions I ask. The issue with imperfection, each one of you comes from a really specific, particular, wonderful background. How can that notion be unpacked in order to dismantle it, do you think, according to where you all come from?
So to recap, how do we dismantle the notion of perfection?
And therefore, by unpacking, dismantle this idea of perfection, and that's going to mean a different thing to each one of you, which is why I'm interested to throw that out.
So we don't have time for everyone on the panel to answer that question, unfortunately. So the question again is, how do we dismantle the paradigm of perfection? Who has a burning desire?
I've got just a really specific towards the industry in which so many people receive so many images and messages from entertainment, from movies, from advertisement, modeling, which all of us receive, our daughters receive, we receive, and we try to emulate this whitewashed version of reality, which is not reality at all. So one of my jobs, one of my missions, is really to look at any of these advertisements and to really call them out for what they are, for the pornographic images that they are, for the premature sexualization that they are, for the, you know, you could take any magazine cover, and I think Jamie Lee Curtis did it so awesome. She had what was put out, and also Kate Winslet, what was put out in terms of a selling magazine cover, and they were like, oh my God, I have been completely photoshopped. Like, you know, my boobs to waistline to leg length to this whole thing has completely been photoshopped. So to name the lie that is, you know, and to actually go through, and I've gone through with students, with children, with middle school, with high school, and just said, you know, this is the image you're seeing, and this is the reality behind that image. It's photoshopped. You've got your team of whoever that is trying to perfect this whitewashed, gender-specific image that we're all supposed to swallow like a little pill and emulate. And that's not the truth. That's not the reality. So I come forward with that. Who else wants to give it a go?
So I shockingly come from an academic intellectual side. But one of the things I love about teaching at the university level is getting to actually undo that so many students now are taught for the exam rather than taught to be curious and taught to figure things out. And so in my class, even though it's finance and decimal points matter, I happily demonstrate screwing up and making mistakes and celebrate when they catch me and teach them constructive ways to look at people in authority and tell them it's not correct because they need to be able to do that as they move forward in their careers. So the way I take my own sense of all the pressures I put on myself to never make a mistake and is to look at them and encourage it. And when the kid asks the question that used to be considered stupid or meaningless, saying, I'm so glad you asked that question. You just opened up so much. So that's how I have taken part of my journey forward with my students.
One more.
No, I wanted to bring the body in. As a somatic therapist, for me, it's so important to be aware of like my own incongruence and how that feels and lives inside of myself. So just when you said like naming the lie, that's been something that's been really a big interest of mine, and just especially when we speak to perfection, not just coming from the outside, but like looking inside, how is it for myself when I'm acting and behaving and moving around the world in a way that's not congruent, and how does that show up, and just start noticing and paying attention and start being like, oh yeah, it's right there, it's in my chest, and just becoming familiarized. And I think that's supportive, because when I start, I'm always told by everyone else in the media not to listen to that inner big voice.
Let's take another question. Do you want to shout it out? And I'll
I don't
recap.
So, as a trans person in the room, possibly the only trans person, who knows?
You never know.
Cara, this question is particularly for you. I found that at the end of the performance, there was a statement around inclusivity, particularly with gender. And I'm wondering how this project aims to address issues that face queer women and trans women in particular.
Okay. So the question, I'm going to try to recap, is how does the Alchemy of Imperfection performance address trans, gender, and queer women?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the statement of this being a project toward inclusivity around gender.
Thank you. So it's a question directed to me, even though I'm not a panelist. I would say, first of all, it's a work in progress. It's a piece that's very much meant to be felt universally and be inclusive. And I may not have the language yet in that piece to reach every person in the rainbow spectrum of ways to be identified. And talk to me after and give me your input on that. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, is that, thanks. Okay, so next question. We have a very quiet audience. Okay, Amanda.
How do you, the panelists, cope with your imperfect moments?
Nice question. So the question is, how do you, the panelists, cope with your imperfect moments?
So coming from infidelity and romantic indiscretion land, I share very much with my clients my personal stories. It helps normalize, it helps contextualize, and it provides a framework that just because I was cheated on doesn't mean that it was because I wasn't perfect. So when we start to sort of share, yes, I've been divorced, and I'm remarried, and I have a blended family, and I've been in abusive relationships, and I've been in healthy relationships, it does include a larger story and contextualizes it for people. So I use a lot of personal sharing.
Anybody else?
I just wanted to say the question presupposes that I have perfect moments. and I would reject that assumption. Which is another way of saying what I do, which is just recognize that that's what's, that all of my moments are imperfect, and that when I'm beating myself up about something, that I'm beating myself up for being human. And I have to say that teaching, and I imagine therapy is also, gives you this same kind of gift. When you find yourself saying these sorts of things to other people over and over and over again, it's much easier to hear, oh, the reason why I'm telling my student this today is because I needed to hear this myself. And so I hear it all the time.
I can add in. For me, I think like community, like having people who really, like I'm friends with Nora, we know each other, and like having people to like, when I'm like, what did I just say? Did that just land? How did that land? And I'm like going through that whole thing. I can like check in with people, and and usually they're like, no, that was fine, or whatever, like that was good. But I think that, I've been so conditioned to have all of these doubts about every single thing that I do that it's helpful to have people who are like affirmative, and then for me to try to track that for myself, like, and to give myself permission that even if I don't have like self-love, what I like to call it, for myself, like in the moment, that I can do it later, or that I can speak up later. So even if I don't say something in the moment, like give myself permission to like say it in 5 minutes or say it in an hour, like I don't have to like get it right away. So.
Camila, did you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. My partner's right here. I would say probably the way I deal with my imperfect moments is I blame the world rather than myself. And with this actually, but I say that like knowingly, because there've actually been some, so if you, I actually come from like a mental health background as well, and there's this interesting dimorphism between kind of sexual, between disorders that are psychological disorders that are associated with women versus with men. And you do tend to see certain disorders kind of group. So for example, anxiety and depression is much more prevalent amongst the female identifying population. And antisocial behavior, substance abuse is much more common amongst men. And a 2011 study actually associated this with that men do tend to externalize their emotions and project them out onto the world. And we can get into the degree to which this is biologically mediated and socially, culturally mediated. But then on the flip side, women do tend to internalize emotions. And what that means is when you do see imperfections in the world, the woman in this audience, you are biologically, socially, culturally, whatever, more likely to look inward and to try to resolve imperfection internally. Whereas men, on average, we're probably going to be like, it's someone's fault. And interestingly enough, my work with kind of like younger groups, you do see this come out. I do a lot of media representation work, which kind of touches on the previous question on how do we kind of address these notions of perfection. They're very artificially constructed. This is the good news. Like the emperor has no clothes when it comes to these. And by looking at and interrogating and deconstructing the media environment that we live in, we can actually become much more aware of where these ideas are coming from. But what I tend to see is that boys get this much more readily and are willing to embrace this more quickly and kind of blame the media culture for their insecurities and for their antisocial tendencies. Whereas there tends to be this hesitancy that in the girl groups that I work with, in the young women groups that I work with. And again, it's just, I feel like an awareness of this, that there is this proclivity on those that identify as women in our population to blame themselves, to blame it inward, to bring it inward. Well, I just thought that'd be useful.
Okay, any further questions? Yes?
So I went to the Women's March, and I must say that I really felt accepted and appreciated there. And I also was very amazed to see how emotional I felt about being there. and that there was sort of a sense of, I don't know, it's just almost brought me to tears sometimes to be in that energy and to feel that, and to also recognize that there are feminine parts of myself that are also suppressed, and that I am also, as a man, affected by this oppression of being able to be tender and to be able to be emotional and to be able to feel things. And I was really grateful to be in that energy in the Women's March. And my question is, what are your suggestions on keeping that energy going and to build that into something that can eventually get us to the point that we're not losing?
I'm going to try my best. So the question is, from a male audience member, how do we move forward as men who want to feel more and be more in touch with emotion and nurture, a sense of nurturing, and part of this community of women moving forward and stepping up? And how do we stop losing and start winning?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to bypass for 1 second. I have to go relieve the babysitter. So, yeah. Thank you.
So maybe a little bit of a pivot, but one of the things that I appreciated about the march and the engagement of men and women in this, and a lot of fathers and daughters were there and seeing that action. And the news coverage. One thing I'd like to, I'm also on the board for the Democratic Women of Boulder County, and if you're not members already or aren't coming to our meetings, would love to invite you to that. It's definitely men and women attending, and I think one of the unique things about that group and the presentations that tends to go there is that whether it's actually thought about that way or not, the communication and the program structure is definitely more feminine than you're going to see at other, like Boulder County Democratic Party or other. If you're interested in engaging, I really appreciate that approach that they bring. We meet the second Wednesday of every month, and we have a website, so happy to talk to people more. So I don't know if that gets to the nurturing and emotional side, but I think what might be interesting is continuing to bridge that gap of how do women work and women in politics, and creating those support networks. We, support financially and from training women and like other candidates who work for us. So I would be interested in your feedback should you choose to do that, and just how you see those meetings, that engagement, and that place of where you belong and how you're brought into that could be a fun next step.
Would anybody else like to address that question?
Were you at the Denver March?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was in the DC, so I don't know if it was different, but I didn't feel a particularly feminine, I don't know. I didn't feel like I was in a feminine space, even though it was a majority female space. And so maybe things happen differently in Denver than in DC. For me, I guess part of the question would be how much of the experience that you had was about your experience of the gendering of the space that you were in, and how much of it was about being in public, occupying public space with other human beings, right? That is, I don't know how much of your experience was about gender and how much wasn't. And there is something tremendously liberating about doing that. And there's something tremendously affirming about seeing the vast numbers of people who showed up for these marches despite the original expectations of the organizers in Denver and in DC and elsewhere. And so the exhilaration that you might feel in those moments might not be something that can be reduced to just about the gendering of the space. And if it's about being in public, acting together with other people, I would say do that more, Right? And do that with men, do that with women, do that with people who do not identify with the gender binary. Do it. It's fun. And it's worth doing. And that's partly how you're going to feel like you're winning again. Although, the way that you phrased that part of your question sounded very Trump-like, so I want to resist it. But we're going to win again by occupying public space. That is something that we can do, even if we're out in terms of the party.
Okay, let's take one more question. Yes.
So my friend Michaele and I were talking about how in this particular climate, and it's an open question to the panel, in this particular climate, it can become quite paralyzing when those expectations and those demands that are placed on women in particular are just at this level that is so horrendous and harmful. And so I was wondering where you might go in those moments when these political acts and these social acts come bearing down on us, and in those moments when you are not distracted by your children, you're not speaking with your partners, but you're really on your own dealing with this. Where do you go in those spaces so that you do not, ideally become paralyzed?
Okay. So where do you go when you feel particularly paralyzed by current expressions of politics and social issues that are harmful to women?
So I don't know if this gets at the question, but it's just what came to mind. Two things come to mind. I have a strong spiritual practice, so I get clear on where I need to be in relationship to my spiritual practice. And that helps ground me, and that helps bring me into alignment with what I might need to do to ultimately take care of myself in those fragile moments. And then I write about what I'm feeling, and I write about what I'm experiencing, and I write about what I'm observing. And some of that then goes into a blog or my newsletter or a soundbite that goes to my subscriber list, and I hope that it resonates and heals any dissonance and discord that somebody else in a similar situation might be feeling. So I reach out, yeah.
I'm a runner, so like a spiritual practice, I go and get my breathing and my trees, and I do on trails, so I have that. But the other side, I think it's that I go internal and I find myself, and then I say, and I'm feeling particularly brave these days in the face of Trump, or he whose name I guess we're not mentioning, but yeah. And I'm feeling particularly like I got nothing to lose. I mean, I've already had that. I mean, when you're 10 and your father leaves you for dead, and then Trump's elected, you say, well, I got this. So it's a little facetious, but I think about that a lot. I think, well, okay, so what are you going to do today to be bold and make this change? Ellen, you were given this for a very good reason. So I have been very bold with my voice. I've stepped up to lead groups, and so I'm also president of the Longmont area Democrats, and I'm on the board of the ARC, and I do all these other things because I really believe that giving this voice and creating this community, and I'm very active with the Colorado Immigrants' Rights Coalition, and I speak out for them. And then in my classroom, I'm a little subversive, but in a constructive way, consistent with the values of academia. But I start every class with a quote on my board. And it's a quote on leadership. It's a quote on how we can respond. It's a quote on growth. It's a quote on change. And I'm finding that my students also are really grateful for that. So I take that internal place that has felt violated and attacked and scared, and I figure it out, and I come back and I take great pride, and I'm proud that I can have this leadership and this privilege and say, okay, and I drop the next, and they actually take pictures with their cell phones of these slides. It's pretty neat, so. And I talk about them a lot like they're my kids, but they're doing great.
Yeah, I just wanted to name what's the wisdom of the paralyzed and immobilization. That sometimes for myself to just even name that that's what's happening, that I'm, you know, whether it's a freeze response or a fight response, there's something about my nervous system is needing to do that. And the ways that I feel like when I'm great about taking care of myself is actually allowing that to sequence through, and rather than resisting it and not giving space for it.
So that's a good question. And as you were asking, I was just like, well, yeah, I've found myself in that same question, that same space many times in this moment. I'm like, do I have an answer for that? I don't know. But I do, and then I go back, and I mean, for me, there's different things. I'm like, resourcing community, like we all have different types of community, really figuring out ways to like use our community in different ways. I think a lot of times, I mean, for me, it's like I forget that I have community. I'm like, I have to do this on my own. I have to be strong. There's all these messages, but I don't, and I have community, and we can use vulnerability. We can use all these different things, some of that we've talked about, and like, and when I'm having a hard time, rely on my community. When they're having a hard time, you know, like, I think that that's what I'm thinking is like an answer to this, and to know that there are different people in our community who are both feeling it in deeper and harder ways and different ways, and then there are people, so like how do I take care of myself so I can also, you know, be part of that for different people in our community who might, you know, who are probably feeling it in lots of different ways that I'm not feeling it. So I think that sometimes it can be easy to think I have to do all these big things and I have to, you know, but like in Boulder, in Colorado, in Denver, there are things that, you know, as in our churches, I mean, if people are part of churches, or there's all these different places that we can be doing things collectively. And I also just wanted to chime in real quick and say a little bit to your question, but I think for me, so much of it again goes back to that, like we have to be uncomfortable also, and we have to like keep asking questions. When we think about like why there's, like one of the fundamental ideologies that exist is that girls and women are like not good, they're bad, they're like not as good as men. Like that's a fundamental sort of idea in our, we might not all agree with it, but it's like, how do we challenge that? How do we continue to challenge that? How do we continue to challenge the binaries so that we do have more space with one another?
Okay, I've got a bunch of things. First of all, I want to name something that I think a lot of us are talking about, which is trauma. And say, if you know that you are in trauma, if you're having the physical symptoms of trauma, go do some trauma work with a therapist. Right? I've definitely done some since the election. And I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing tonight if it weren't for that, because first of all, dealing with students and staff and colleagues who were really traumatized because the election affected them so very deeply for a variety of reasons, and trying to be there for them when I really needed to also take care of myself was impossible, right? And so that's the first thing. Like, take care of yourself. You don't have to be watching news 24/7. You don't have to be on Facebook. Get off it, right? Like when it's too much, take care of yourself. Secondly, be with other people. Go to a protest. When they were having the postcard parties at the Rayback Collective, that was amazing, right? All these strangers getting together and writing postcards to their congressman together over beer. That was fabulous. But do things with other people. If it's not your direct community, right, find other people who you share that sense of outrage with and be with them. Take action, whatever that action is, but whatever action you take, don't be a perfectionist about it. Don't be like, I'm gonna, start my own political party and I'm gonna run for president, and in 2020 I'm gonna be the president, right? Like, don't do that, right? Start with, what can I actually do on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis that I can see myself realistically being able to do 4 years from now, because you're gonna need to be able to do it for a long time. And if it's working with an organization, then great, do it. If it's, well, maybe I can make a phone call to a senator once a week, do that, right? Make it Cory Gardner. And then the last thing I want to say is laugh, right? One of the great things that's come out since the inauguration is that the Washington Post and the New York Times have both started having daily columns reviewing the best of late night comedy.
It's so great.
Right? Yeah, okay, so some of you have seen this. Hey, go watch this stuff. Read the columns, laugh, right? Because that also gives you the sense it's not just you. There are lots of other people laughing at these jokes. There are lots of people writing the jokes. And it also can take some of the weight of what's going on off for just a moment.
Oh, I go rock climbing. No, but true that. Actually, no, truly, because like laughter actually is a mechanism to deal with tragedy and trauma. It's not all fun and games. It's actually deeply connected with trauma. Yeah, I don't know. I think self-care. And actually, this kind of gets to your question, sir, about how we sustain this thing. You need to know how to recharge yourself. And I train people to do sexual violence crisis counseling, which is extremely emotive, and there's a lot of vicarious trauma that's inevitable from it. And you're just going to burn out from that work in a month or two unless you really take this notion of self-care seriously. And it applies right now. Because I know every morning when I wake up and I see my CNN alerts from the night, I'm just like, what is going on? And it's a traumatic life I'm living in. I'm just like in this constant trauma, so know how to recharge it, because we got a long haul ahead of us.
I think also, and it's what I was already saying, but I think different communities are facing things in different ways. So, like, and I think we can reach out to them and find out, like, if we're immobilized by, like, we don't know what to do, like, there are different communities facing deportation and healthcare access and all of these, like, things that we might not be facing and experiencing in our lives. So, you know, we can reach out and ask these communities, like, how can we help? The Islamic Center in Boulder, they're having an open house on Sunday, so folks can go visit that. There's just lots of different organizations, grassroots organizations that we can, like, reach out and, like, find out how we can plug in, I think, as well to those organizations.
All right. Well, that was a very full evening. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your answers. And please keep the conversation going. Thanks so much.